Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. Julia here from Juris Education. We're an admissions consulting company that's dedicated to helping deserving law students get into the school of their dreams. Really excited you could all join us today because we have an exciting webinar all about what you need to know about LSAT retakes. Just to go over a little introduction to us, if you don't know or if you're not familiar with what Juris does, like I mentioned, we're an admissions consulting company that helps people get into law school. We have over 15 years of experience, a 94% success rate, and students that work with us are 4.5 times more likely to get a scholarship. Just to go over what we'll be talking about today, we'll talk about when to retake the LSAT, some strategic preparation that you can take for retakes if you find yourself in that position, understanding LSAT score trends and really utilizing those to get a better score. And then of course, we'll have insights from Mika, who is our advisor that's joining us today. I know you guys will all love her, so I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself to you.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I know some of you have seen my webinars before, but if you haven't, hello. I'm Mika MacDonald. I am an LSAT tutor and admissions consultant here at Juris. I took the LSAT twice, all the way back in 2011. I scored a 172 and then a 179. I attended the University of Chicago Law School. After I graduated, I clerked for a bankruptcy judge in Delaware. And then I worked as a corporate bankruptcy litigator for about 5 years before leaving the practice of law during the pandemic. I did some data science stuff for a little bit, and I've been teaching and tutoring full-time for about 3 years now. So I'm excited to talk to you guys today about LSAT retakes. As someone who retook the LSAT and had it play definitely a major effect in my outcomes, I can testify that this is just an important topic to be aware of and to have a plan around. I don't seem to have control over the slides.
Yes, that would be me that has control over.
Okay, go for it.
Just want to do a couple of housekeeping things because this is a question that gets asked a lot. I just want to address it right from the jump. This webinar will be recorded and we will be sending this out to all attendees 24 hours after we're finished. So you can expect it at 9 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Another thing I'd like to flag is if you have a question, we'd ask that you please type it in the chat box just so that we can get to it in our designated Q&A section. Sometimes it kind of derails the topic at hand if we're answering questions in the middle of our webinar. So if you could just hang on to them or just type them in the chat box and we will get to them at the end. So I think we can go ahead and get started. Luckily, it's just Mika today, so I'll let her drive. Go ahead.
Okay. So the big dilemma with the LSAT, I honestly think is, should you always be ready to retake? I think that it is good to always build in a buffer for those of you who are just starting studying, right, and leading up to the next cycle. I think you should definitely build a buffer in. Take the test a few months ahead of the application window opening. So the July or August test. That way you have room to retake it early in the cycle. For those of you who are later in the cycle, like right now, right, with the February test having just happened, no test in March, which means the next test is in April. Question is it worth taking one more time this cycle, submitting that and hoping that moves one of the schools that you've already applied to, right? But none of those questions matter very much unless you actually think you can achieve improvement, right? Without thinking about the reasons you don't already have the score you want, you're not going to do better the next time around. Sometimes it's something as simple as, oh, can we roll the next slide? Can we roll to the next one? Yeah. Okay. The first big thing I think to think about is simply how many hours have you already put in? And how many hours can you realistically put in the near future, right? Because if you, I don't know, I think I see a lot of people that seem very frustrated their score isn't going up. But in reality, they're studying 5 hours a week, haphazardly, no real plan. And once every couple of weeks or every 3 weeks, they take a practice test. Right? But that's not a realistic plan for improvement. And if you want to retake in 2 months, right? So people who are retaking in April potentially in the crowd, how many hours are you actually going to be able to put in before April, right? If you are working nearly full time and you can max put in 5 hours a week, then that still might not be enough time to really meaningfully improve your score. So I think anytime you're considering a retake, you have to really think about, am I going to be able to do the things necessary to make this improvement? The second thing is, right, how far is your current score from what you want? So to give context on this, for example, I was quote unquote super splitter. I had a 3.25 undergraduate GPA, which obviously put me way outside the range of any T14's 25-75 split. Even a decade ago, I was way outside the possible range for that. So I knew that if I wanted to get into a T14 law school, I had to have one heck of a score, which is why I retook the 172, right, to get that 179, because that was what I needed to get. But if you want to go to your local state school and you are already 7 points above their LSAT median, and you're already looking at either a 3/4 or full ride scholarship there, then what's the point, right? So think about what your goal is and think about how realistically it can be achieved. Next step is being active in your review and active in identifying your weaknesses. We'll see in a slide later on that we have where I'll kind of show exactly what I knew I was doing poorly at my first sitting and what I needed to improve on going forward, right? I could see my own weaknesses and I spent a lot of time thinking about them. But again, if your study thus far has been haphazard and untargeted, more haphazard and untargeted study isn't going to lead to great gains. And we already kind of talked about this final factor, which is timing-wise. When do you need your score by? For those of you in the crowd thinking about taking in April, I think obviously you need to look it up on a school-by-school basis. Many schools won't accept the April exam, some do. So same thing next year. You also have to think about the timing of the application process. There is pretty decent data that shows that the later you apply in the admission cycle, the more of a handicap you're putting yourself at, right? There's less scholarship money and you need higher stats to be more certain of getting in. So if you are trying to get from a 165 to a 168, but first application would be in on perfect on time, the other one would be in February 20th. There's a dilemma there, right? So there's a lot of considerations to weigh, basically, and this is going to be a person-by-person sort of decision. Right? Can we roll forward? So a few common myths that I really want to dispel. First and foremost, right, know the school. It is true that the strong majority of schools really only care about your highest, but some schools consider all of them, some schools average them, and honestly, every admissions officer is still taking a story away from your score progression, right? So even if your last score is 5 points higher than your previous one, if an admissions officer sees that you've taken it 5 times in 6 months, all within a 5-point score band, they might go, hey, this person just out of random chance had a really good day that day and scored higher than they usually would, right? If an admissions officer sees somebody retake and score lower than their previous test, they think that that person either didn't have the skill indicated by the first test, or just kind of didn't take it seriously when they tried to retake and didn't put any work in. So think about the narrative that your score progression is painting. On the other hand, right, if a school sees somebody who got a 145 and then a 151 and then a 161 and then a 172, that says to them that this person works hard and keeps improving, right? As long as your score keeps going up, all schools see is somebody who is driven. So that's the big thing here. Just if you're going to retake, make it count. Don't create a negative narrative. Don't create a bad impression immediately from the get-go. Obviously, this idea that a retake will always lead to a higher score, it is really easy for it to not lead to a higher score. I would say the number one way it's easy for that to happen is taking, again, 1 month later. That is not enough time to meaningfully, like, even be certain that you've made improvement. You've got your score, right, your score report from the first sitting hanging over your head that entire time as well, right? And so you get your prior score a week and a half before your next scheduled exam. That's terrible, right? You've been under a huge anxiety, stress, pressure. You've been wondering what your score was. That's made you have, not really try as hard as you could in your studies. Don't rush, right? Improvement takes time and consistent effort. And when I see someone rush to retake, it sort of says to me that they don't want to give me time and consistent effort. They just want to like kind of step up to the bat and hope they hit a home run. And that's not really how the LSAT works. All right, let's keep rolling. All right, finding the right test dates, right? I already kind of mentioned this, but when you think about the LSAT timeline, right, that application season opening in October, November, right, you want to have your score ready by then. Optimal, right? That would be optimal. So if you took, for example, the September or October test, I can't remember what they're offering this upcoming year. They just released that schedule. Sure, your score will be ready. But if you have to retake, you are now retaking later than the application or the application season opening, right? Which means you are now putting yourself at a disadvantage in the rolling admissions process. So when you think about your LSAT timeline, think about what is the test date that gives me at least 2 months to study for a retake. That would be like my 100% my advice. It's also a good idea to do something like this for a few other reasons. Number one of which is sometimes test day goes wrong and scores get canceled through no fault of your own, right? A bad proctor, test center gets closed, there might be a flood or something locally, all sorts of stuff that might happen to wipe out the test date that you were relying on. So again, building in some wiggle room, giving yourself that extra test date 2 months in a row matters. I have at least 4 students a year, I would say, that get their tests canceled under unfair conditions. So give yourself that space. Another reason, right, is nerves. Some of us don't respond our best under heavy pressure, especially the first time we do something. I have had students that scored 5 points below their practice test average the first time they took it, and then they scored right at their practice test average the second time. Right? I think there's something to be said for it's less intimidating when you've already done it once. So I think those are all good reasons to build this into your timeline, right? Really build it into the timeline to be safe. Okay, let's keep rolling.
Okay, I just want to take this time to just do a little check-in, take a breather. I know we've, had a lot of information and talked about a lot of interesting things. So I want to use this time as an opportunity to go and let you guys know that, or let everybody know that just for attending this webinar, you get a 10% off coupon for all of your entire program with Juris. So you can scan the QR code or type in the code once you book a consultation. That's 10 off web to get the 10% off and book a consultation with one of our advisors like Mika and really get started on your journey to getting into the law school of your dreams. All right, back to our regular scheduled programming.
Okay. Yeah. I think anybody who's already in the LSAT process understands how much pressure comes along with this, right? It's a big exam. It's a really huge undertaking. It plays a huge role in the admissions process. Everything combines to make this pretty tough. And we add on the fact that the LSAT constantly tells us we're wrong over and over and over. And that's a little bit of an ego drain to just kind of see red X's on your screen every day, days and days on end. So when you decide to retake, you should really think about your mindset as well. It is very easy for lots of people to burn out on the LSAT, and then they decide they want to retake because they want a higher score. But this is not working for you, right? And if you are currently burning out, then immediately throwing yourself back into the test is a recipe for disaster and non-improvement, right? And I have had one student like this in 2 years, happily, but if you have a just anxiety issue, a nerves issue that causes you to score dramatically less on test day than during practice, right? Rushing to a retake isn't going to help that problem, right? So think about your mentality as you go into the process for retaking. It is really easy for students to decide to do it, but not commit to it, or to have something that's clearly already holding them back that they need to work on first. When we talk about like that test day anxiety stuff, right? Be retrospective or reflective. Be reflective about it. Be reflective about the original experience and what went well and what went wrong. If you did get thrown off course, if you did start tilting at some point, ask yourself what caused it, right? What set this off? The more mindful you are, the more reflective you are, the better the second time is likely to go. But again, I'll just emphasize, rushing into another exam is not going to get you a better score. So building this like mindset, I think the number one thing I emphasize, at least with students, is it's okay to be wrong, right? A lot of parts of our life tell us that we can't ever be wrong, or if we're wrong, it's shameful in some way. But on the LSAT, being wrong is part of the process for everyone. I got a lot of questions wrong before I got my way up to 179. If you can get past that sort of ego hit, I think the LSAT becomes a lot easier. But I think a lot of people really do struggle with this being okay with being wrong. All right, let's keep going. Excuse me. So what helped me the second time around and what held me back the first? Let's actually start with the right-hand side. What held me back the first time? I would say I genuinely hadn't mastered the test. I felt really great about it, obviously. I was scoring in the low 70s. But I could tell that like I didn't quite understand some of the hardest questions, especially on logic games and logical reasoning. I felt like those two sections, there were some high-level questions every time that I had issues with. I had a notable particular weakness in logic games with complex multi-group in-out games. Y'all don't have to worry about that. Logic games is not on the exam anymore. But suffice to say, I knew I had a distinct weakness there. And I had like maybe a little bit of a concentration issue when there were like these longer repetitive sort of answer choices. I would tend to like let little wording slip. And obviously that can be disastrous. And then the final big issue I had was maybe like a little bit of hubris, a little overconfidence. Just moving too fast through the early questions, trying to rush towards the ultra hard ones. And then I'd misread one of them and I'd miss something I should never ever miss. Right? I knew I had all of those problems. So what worked for me the second time was, well, number one, I knew what I was messing up with. At least to some degree, I could describe and say, this is what I need to work on. Second big thing was the Feynman method. For any of those out there who don't know what the Feynman method is, it's basically explain this like you would it to a 5-year-old, and then think about how you can make your explanation better, right? So what did happen was I took the test, I got my 172, and I started teaching the test. You know, this is over a decade ago, way back when, for another test prep company. So I took it, I started teaching it, and when I tried to teach ultra difficult logical reasoning questions to other people, I found that my understanding of them improved a lot, right? Through that process, it improved a lot. So I will say, at least for me, working with other people helps. So just to do the soft pitch for everyone, tutors are there for that. Right? One of the big things that they do is they provide someone for you to discuss and explain the LSAT to. And I always tell my students that's very true. It's a two-way street. I'm going to explain things to you, but I'm also going to force you to explain yourself to me. Because the better you can do that, the better you understand your own internal thought process. So that hits this last point of finding new resources. So again, this is way back when at the time, right? There was a particular, well, I mean, r-LSAT existed on Reddit already. This is the early days, so to speak. And there was a particular teacher on there whose stuff I found really, really helpful and fascinating. And so I basically gathered up every single free resource he had ever put out there and started using that for logical reasoning. And I think that really helped me make a breakthrough. I found new resources that gave me a new, fresh perspective, and that really helped improve my mastery. So that's kind of like one of the biggest things I would say is my dad always liked to say, you know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, right? So if you're going to do a retake, then do things differently, right? Find a new perspective, find a new set of resources, find a tutor, find a friend and start a study group, right? But do something different, meaningfully different, and hopefully that'll lead to some breakthroughs. All right, roll for it. I'm just like always setting up the next slide and then already taking it away. Yeah, if your original approach didn't work, use a fresh strategy, right? And that's not to say that you can't say, oh, well, you know, I also didn't have enough time to prep before, right? It wasn't necessarily my methods were bad, but I also really didn't have enough time. And that might be true, but adding new things in is always good. Giving yourself new material and a new perspective is valuable. I also see students do this thing, right, where after the first test, they kind of think that they're maybe done learning almost, right? And so they just go ahead and take practice test and practice test and practice test and practice test, and they do nothing but take practice tests, right? And will you get better doing that? Of course, right? That's obvious. You would get better to some degree doing that. But is that the best way to get better? Is that the most effective way? Definitely not, right? Look at your analytics, use new methods, always be thoughtful about why you're missing things, and when you review well. I guess the last thing, it's not actually like really reflected by any of these points, but I just want to point it out. A lot of students don't use question journals. Most students don't use question journals. But I would submit that if you are taking this test for the second or third or fourth or fifth time, and you haven't tried using a question journal before, I would really, really suggest you try it. All of the research literature out there suggests that it is the sort of best possible way to improve on standardized tests. Or maybe not the best possible way, but it is something that accelerates learning and mastery to a very huge degree. So if you are the sort of person who loves to just quote unquote do it, right? Who loves to just jump in, take a test, review it, jump in, take a test, do it, jump in, take a test, do it. I know that might feel good, but genuinely the research says that it is not the right approach. And I would also kind of say that is if you feel like you're having trouble learning, go read some literature on how to improve at learning. I actually do that on a relatively frequent basis, both for learning and teaching, because I think reading like secondary sources on both helps me improve. Basically, think of all of the angles. And again, I would say if you are retaking and you scored substantially lower than your practice test average last time, really ask if there is a nerve or psychological issue that you might want to be working on here. Some things are only improvable through therapy. That's kind of the way I would put it. Okay, keep rolling. So I guess we're kind of hitting on that same group of people again, the ones who just want to keep taking test after test after test, hoping that the next one will suddenly have a higher number attached to it. But that's not what's going to happen. I really, really emphasize the question journaling. Look for patterns among questions. Look for argumentative structures, right? Simplest thing is like a concept of change over time. Right, that's not in every LSAT question, but it is in a lot of LR questions, and when it shows up, it tends to influence what the right answer is going to look like. So being able to see these things when they appear is how you get to this level, basically, right? It's not that you're just looking at individual questions, you're seeing how questions are similar and how answer types are similar. Drilling with focus, I think, is important. Analytics are good to use, right? There's lots of ways to keep track of your analytics, both yourself or through other websites. But being able to say, I seem to not be good with the inference type questions, must be true, most strongly supported, or I'm really struggling with questions that require a lot of conditional diagramming. These are distinct weaknesses that lots of students have, and being aware of them and being focused on fixing them, that's maximizing your score. I guess the last thing I would say is not everyone can answer every question all of the time. Sometimes we're not fast enough, and that's okay. Sometimes we can't do everything the optimal way. But what we can still do is try to get the best outcome possible, right? Maximize your scores. So if you're a student, for example, that is running out of time around question 22 on the reading comp section, I've got some strategies for you, right? To make sure that you are getting the maximum points possible, regardless of whether you're able to get to every question. A similar thing comes from just understanding that you don't have to answer questions in the order they are given to you, right? No one's looking over your shoulder. No one's saying that you have to do question 22 before after question 1. And there can be some really strategic gains there in terms of like, how do I pace myself? What questions do I deal with first, and which ones do I come back to later? But if you're going to retake, right, we want to get every single possible point, right? Every point. Okay, let's keep rolling. All right. So as time bears down on you, right, as the test date looms, right, you should start narrowing your focus. One, probably to speed training. That's almost always valuable to everyone. But the other is just high impact areas, right? And so some obvious stuff is just to say like, hey, flaw is the most common question type on the exam by quite a long shot, right? So if time is growing short and if I'm just as bad at flaw as I am at everything else, I should go ahead and study flaw because that's the one that's most likely to show up on the exam, right? Thinking about, again, what's going wrong, right? Why are you making the mistakes you made? One of the things I like to point out to people is to get a 179 or 180, it's not just to be great at the test, it's to execute flawlessly. Never misread a word. Never misunderstand a word. Always notice if the question is posed as an accept question, right? Flawless execution. You'd be surprised. I've had students that, missing 12 total questions over the whole exam, and 6 of them would be execution mistakes, right? Simple errors that had nothing to do with understanding how to answer the question and everything to do with being sloppy. And that's a big area to look at. I have lots of little safeguards that I build into my test taking process. So I mentioned accept style questions before. If I see the word accept, I instantly highlight it, right? Just to drive home to myself what I'm looking at. For weaken and strengthen questions, I highlight the question stem that says that because it's too easy to do 2 strengthens in a row and then a weaken and forget that the third one's a weaken, right? So having these little fail safes, figuring out where you're making unforced errors, that's a big score gain in and of itself. So along the way to your retake, how should you study your structure time? I'm going to give you the cookie cutter answer, which is, I don't know, it's a balance, right? And it depends on the person. But what I can say is everything is required. Just taking tests is not going to be good. Just doing drilling is not going to be good, right? Just watching videos or doing reading is not going to be good. You know you better than anyone else. What I would say is the biggest reason we cycle what sort of resources we're using is to avoid monotony, right? Switch between reading and video, switch between drilling and a video, back and forth through different things, but it's mainly to keep our brains on task. So as you structure your study time, be realistic about what you can do and what will actually keep you on task. And yeah, be realistic about how much time you have before test day. If you want to see a 10-point improvement and the next test is in 2 months, I would say plan on 10 to 20 hours a week minimum. So only you can know that schedule, but the point is you need to plan this out way ahead of time if possible. All right, keep rolling. Okay, so yeah, there's so many people out there that say they have the solution, but there is no the solution. All solutions are customized to the problem in front of them. So your strategy and your study plan needs to mirror what you need to get better at. If you need to get better at the logical reasoning section and you're at an intermediate level, you should be working with a tutor, have test prep sort of curriculum some kind, and re-examine where you are and what you need to do to improve. If you're having trouble in reading comp, fix that. If you're having trouble in LR, focus on that. If you're having major trouble with high difficulty necessary assumptions, obviously fix that. But only you and your tutor can know what you should be focusing on. I already mentioned just being strategic on test day, right? There's a difference between like understanding everything and winning, right? And as long as you win, no one cares about how you got there. So if you know that you'll have time shortages, or if you know that you are prone to being better or worse at certain question types, being slowed down or thrown off by certain question types, then managing your pace and being strategic about your answer order can be really, really powerful. Yeah. And then finally, nothing prepares you better for the real thing than a mirror image of the real thing. I'll just go back to, if nerves or anxiety are a problem, studying is not going to fix that problem, right? Other interventions are needed to fix that problem. Yeah. Okay. Next slide. Yay. So I think we talked about this earlier in passing a little bit. Some schools, average scores. This is the minority approach by far. Most schools primarily focus on your highest score because for rankings purposes in the U.S. News and World Report, right? For rankings purposes, that's what matters, nothing else. But we already talked about how your score report also paints a narrative, right? And if it took you 5 tries and you got 4 scores that were basically the same and one that was higher than the others, they might think that that was luck. Or they think that you didn't take this seriously until the final exam. And that also kind of reflects poorly. So if you are going to retake, try to do the absolute best you can to make sure that that retake is higher than the previous score. Conversely, improving is improving. People get this idea that like, oh, well, if it takes me like 3 tests before I get a 174, aren't they going to think that I'm not very smart, that I just worked really hard for it? And my answer was like, did you just hear what you said? Because working hard will get you way farther in life than being smart. And schools know that too. And what they want are successful alumni that give them money. Right? That's it. So proving that you are dedicated and improving is a really, really valuable narrative as part of your application. And yeah, consistency is good. Like the ideal trend is all the way up here, or something that looks like this, right? Something that bounces up and down might be a little weird to look at, especially if you end on a down note. It is possible to write LSAT addendums as part of your application package, but it is relatively rare. And I usually tell people not to do it. I see a question about canceled score. Absolutely. Schools they can see the cancel, but they can't see what it was. I definitely agree that cancels should be used to maintain a good narrative, right? I think using that cancel is smart. On the other hand, if they see test, cancel, 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 test, now they are again getting that vibe that you're not taking the process that seriously. So canceling 3 exams in a row, that can start to reflect poorly on your application. But using 1 cancel strategically, even 2, is, I think, absolutely a smart idea, if it's needed. Okay, next slide. Yeah, we just kind of hit all of these. Improvement over time, right? If there's anything that you should be showing, it should absolutely be that. Because if you're not showing that, then they're going to think poorly. Consistency is good, but ultimately, the upward improvement is more important than how consistent the upwardness is, as long as you keep going up. some schools ask for people to write in if they've improved by more than 10 points. I can't remember. It's not a large number of schools. But at the end of the day, telling people that you worked hard and didn't give up is never a bad thing, right? I would never be apologetic for improving. I would just point to the work you did. And we hit this last point already, right? Not showing improvement is bad. Yeah. All right, keep going. All right, so final tips. Yeah, be realistic about rate of improvement. Focus on how things are feeling and not necessarily just on numbers. Take practice tests regularly, because if you want this to happen, right, if you want to be able to observe your own improvement, practice tests are the best way to do that. I mean, sure, seeing your percentages on practice sections also super valuable, but taking a 3-hour test in 3 hours is exhausting and adds a whole nother layer of difficulty that individual practice sections don't have. So use that as a tracker. Please do not avoid taking practice tests. We talked like mindfulness practices. So look, I can give y'all my things. They weren't my things back when I took it, but I can tell you my thing now is I roller skate a lot. That's my mindfulness activity. I feel better every time I do it. My head feels better, all of that. When I'm in stressful situations, I'm a rubber bander, right? Which means I'll often put something around my wrist and sort of hit it to like kind of keep myself focused. I also think that there's never anything wrong with pausing, closing your eyes, and breathing. Right, just doing sort of a mindfulness reset, center yourself and reset. Those are my things. They're not going to work for everyone, but doing this test is going to be very pressure packed. Being a law student will be very pressure packed. Being a lawyer will be even more pressure packed. So finding ways to deal with this, right? Finding ways to maintain a good mental and emotional frame under stress is a long-term skill investment here. And then finally, there's no rush, right? Give yourself time. Please build that for all of you who are going to be applying this upcoming cycle in 2025 to 2026. Build in time for retakes, right? That is the biggest piece of advice I could give. All right.
Okay, so we're just about to hit the Q&A section of our webinar, but before we do that, just want to take this time to ask you all, if you have any feedback, please let us know by scanning the QR code. Your feedback really does help us improve, so if there's something you'd like to see more of, or maybe something you'd like to see less of, please let us know. We're always open to comments and suggestions, so looking forward to hear from you there. Okay, now we are in our Q&A section. So if you have any questions, and I see some in the chat box that I'll read out shortly, keep them coming, type away. There's also the QR code that you'll see here to book a free consultation with counselors like Mika, because obviously she's so great. We learned so much. We got to book that free consultation. So go ahead and do that by scanning the QR code. Okay, questions here. I have a question from Venetia. What if you graduate with a 4.0 GPA, MBA, are in multiple honor societies, and have made the president lists many times? However, you score very low on the LSAT twice. What are your chances of getting into law school? Would they consider your overall performance?
So I guess I would say is there's probably a law school out there for her, or for this person. I would definitely keep trying to push that LSAT score if possible, but it all depends on the schools, right? There's about 180 something, I think 86 maybe law schools, accredited law schools in the United States. So I would be looking at what region do I want to work in, and what schools are in that region, and what numbers do I need to be competitive at those particular schools. If you're talking about like what we would think of as the big national schools, the T14, at the end of the day, like it's you got to be at least within like 10 points of their median. I don't know if I've ever seen an instance where someone lower than like a low 160s got into like one of the T14 or definitely not the T like 10. So yeah, keep working, and there will be a law school somewhere for you. I'm pretty sure you'll get there. Yeah.
Okay, question from Tammy. Can I take the GRE if I don't improve much on the LSAT?
Yeah, you can absolutely do that. And I would say that schools will always have a preference for the LSAT. It is the test they're used to. It's also the test that's reportable to the U.S. News and World Report. But you are able to apply without an LSAT score at many schools in the United States now using a GRE score instead. Yeah, you can take it if you don't improve much on the LSAT, but I would recommend you try to max the LSAT first. That would kind of be my reply.
Okay, question from Jalissa. What approach would you use to attack reading comprehension questions?
So it depends, right? I tend to think of there being like 3 different broad groups of reading comp questions. So those are like the big picture questions, the detail questions, and the inferential questions. And so the way I attack each of those types, big groupings, tends to be different, right? If it's detail questions, I tend to use the search box a little bit. And I'm also a note taker, so I'll use my notes to kind of build a map of the passage, and that helps me retrieve information faster. If you're talking about like that overall approach, I am a note taker. I am strongly in favor of note taking as opposed to highlighting or active reading. I think I know that all of the research literature in the world says that handwritten notes are the best possible method to drive like read content into your memory. And so that's what I would recommend. Note taking requires some practice, especially because it's a little bit more time consuming, but I ultimately think it's a much better method.
Okay, another question from Tammy. Should I take the April LSAT if I'm waitlisted at Northwestern?
I would have to check Northwestern's requirements, but my bet would be that they don't take the April LSAT. I mean, I could Google this right now. Let's see. Western Law LSAT deadline. Deadline's to hide. Remember. Unclear. I would, if you have already talked to the school, then I would absolutely reach out to them. Like no one knows their policies better than them. I would say that an April retake, even if allowed, you're still very late in the cycle. It doesn't mean you can't get off the wait list. What I would say is the more important thing would be get in contact with them and get them to know your name. And if you aren't already writing letters of continued interest, write those. I got off the wait list at U Chicago in May, and I did it by writing a letter every month, just badgering the people at the admissions offices with how much I loved them and how much I really wanted to be at their school. So sure, take the LSAT, but do be writing those letters. They do read them, and it will make them remember you when they're deciding who to take off the wait list or who to let in.
Okay, question from Kaden. Would you recommend attending the same law school where you completed your undergraduate degree?
I don't think there's anything wrong with it. If you're, what I would always just think about is like, this is a professional school, right? The whole point is to like do a job after, right? It's a profession. So if you want to be doing like big corporate work in New York, then you need to go to one of the T14, right? Even if you love your undergrad institution, if they are a T60 school in middle America, you're not going to New York City from there. On the other hand, if your undergrad is Harvard, then yeah, go to Harvard Law. You can go anywhere from Harvard Law. That sounds good. But if you just want to work in your region and your undergrad has a very well-respected law school that supplies lawyers every year to this region and is kind of like the dominant legal institution in the region, heck yeah, go to that law school, right? If you want to stay and work in, I don't know, let's ignore UPenn. If you want to be in Philly, Villanova is a great place to go to law school, right? Great undergrad, also a great place to go to law school if you want to be in Philly. So I would just think about your career goals. Yeah.
Okay, got a question from Sam. Is improving by 10 points by June realistic, or should I wait till the August exam?
4 months. Yeah, that's realistic improvement in 4 months. Not guaranteed, not impossible, but yeah, realistic, I would say, is very, very reasonable.
Okay. Just before I read the next question, Ray, I see you with your hand up. If you don't mind and Nicole, I see you both with your raised hands. If you don't mind just typing your question in the chat box, we'll go ahead and answer that for you. But we got a question from Ethan. What would you say is good advice for someone who struggles with maintaining longer-term engagement with material and questions?
So I will say from a test-taking perspective, this is also a reason I advocate for note-taking and reading comp, because it's a very active process. It helps us stay engaged, whereas with passive reading, even with active reading, it's very easy to become passive and start to lose focus. If we're talking from more like a studying perspective, I would say that variety of materials helps, right? Rotating through different sort of activities helps. One of the things I tell people about reading comp is stop asking whether you care about this passage and start asking, why does the author care, right? You'd be surprised how far empathy gets you, really, in the reading comp section. I know that a lot of topics and a lot of essays can feel quite boring and dry, but someone somewhere out there cared enough to write it. And I'm always interested in just trying to understand what their brain's like. I think that's kind of about it I've got right here. But think about what makes things engaging for you in a learning context and try to replicate that as best as possible throughout the course of your study. I think that's the way to go.
Okay, question from Allie. Is the LSAT weighted the same for online JD programs?
The LSAT, yes. I don't know the particulars of any specific program, but I would imagine that if it is an accredited program offered by one of the accredited law schools in the United States, then they would treat the JD, like the LSAT score, the same anyone else would.
Okay, question from Bryce. What are the best first steps to get started for preparing for the LSAT? We have a bunch of webinars about that, Bryce, if you're interested.
That was kind of what I was going to say, is our website and our YouTube channel have a lot of great stuff about just getting going with the LSAT. If you haven't already gone to the Law School Admissions Council's website, that's the place to go. They're the ones who make the LSAT. They're also like the hub where all of your application materials will get sent through. So going and reading their FAQ is a really great place to start, as is signing up for Law Hub, which is like their, some free resources they directly offer through there. So that's what I would say. Go to their website, get the info from them, go to ours. We've got some great application timeline sort of stuff. So that'll give you the whole JD application process. And we also have some great materials on how to get started studying for the LSAT, overviews of all of the sections, all of that stuff. Yeah.
Okay, question from Britt. Since there's rumors that the logical reasoning section has more quantitative questions, how do you recommend practicing for this?
Not sure what the rumors are or aren't. What I would say is that there have always been mathy type questions on the LSAT. And in fact, they may have been more common early on than they are now. I would say newer books are probably more up to date, but the better way to think about it is that there are currently, 158? So the current practice test series runs from 101 to 158, right? Those are all of the practice tests, like those are all of the real exams that have been given. This is a rework, some older stuff that you don't need to know about. But the point being, all of those are still valid representations of the test. The more recent stuff is better, yes. But the more recent stuff is also like from like 2020, right? They haven't released any of the tests they've given since I think August 2020. No, I think the last one they released was November 2020. So even the new materials don't reflect the tests that people are having rumors about right now. So that would kind of be my general point. All of the old materials are valid, and I wouldn't necessarily buy too much into the rumors because we don't have any evidence for them. Yeah.
Okay, question from Ray. How do you overcome the anxiety part? Because you mentioned tutoring wouldn't help that. Also, can you speak to JD Next scores and their variance?
Well, look, like I have a student who has taken the test twice. She has scored in the high 130s both times. When we last worked together, she was practice testing in the mid 160s. Tutoring is not going to get her that score. Whatever is happening is something that's happening in her mind on test day, right? And that is not something a tutor is equipped to work with. So if you're having major anxiety issues that are basically demolishing your score on test day, that sounds like something that a therapist or psychiatrist is better suited to talk about with and approach with. That's kind of the point I'm making, which is a tutor can definitely help you develop mindfulness, help you be centered, definitely improve your skills, give you the strategies to succeed. But we are also just educators, right? We're not therapists. Yeah.
Okay, unfortunately, I think that's all the time we have for our questions. Apologies that we didn't get to everybody, but if you didn't get your question answered, why not use the opportunity to book a free consultation and get your question answered? I want to thank Mika again for joining us on this webinar and really sharing her unique insights. I know I learned a lot, and I hope you all did too. Once again, to clarify, if you missed it in the beginning, this webinar will be sent out to all attendees tomorrow in 24 hours. So be on the lookout for that. You'll also want to visit our Juris Education website to take a look at all the other webinars that we have planned for the month. And with that, I think we're ready to sign up. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Take care.